Hello. Um, on this video, I would like to talk a little bit about my work and my background. There is a Russian video on the channel which covers this a little bit, but I wanted to do something in English. So first, a little bit about my background. I started being interested in spiritual things and by extension things about psychology pretty early. When I was 12 years old, I started to meditate spontaneously. I might have meditated even earlier, but conscious understanding that I'm doing something like meditation started pretty early. I think I might have been 11 and a half at that time. I don't remember exactly. That was pretty much exactly the time when we moved from one place to another in St. Petersburg. And I was, I think, a little bit under 12 years old at that time. I remember my mother crying because the first time I rode 2 buses from my school to the new home. And I did this alone by myself. And now I think my parents would have been arrested if they allowed me to ride 2 buses in a crowded city of 5 or so million people. But at that time, I certainly didn't think anything about it. So I got an interesting book on psychology and autogenic training when I was around 16 from my mother, who was desperately trying to understand what her son was up to. And then when we moved to the United States, shortly thereafter, I met a representative of my future Indian guru on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, frankly not too far from where I would eventually get my PhD. And I got formally initiated at tender age of 19. And that started my association with India, with my Indian guru, and a lot of very good things. The training that I got from them was very, very good. But in the early 90s, my Indian guru died, and I realized that I needed to digest what I received there from him and from his senior disciples. And that started on a very painful period when I was missing big time my association with my guru's organization, with my brother and sister disciples. But at the same time, it was very necessary for me to digest what I received there. That digestion, to be honest with you, separates me from a lot of people. I know very few people who actually did something with their experience, with their education, and made it into their own. For me and for a couple other people I know, it has happened. Of course, nothing is perfect, so please don't come back to me and say, well, you're not perfect, this and that. I know I'm not. Also, in the 90s, I've met several, primarily 2, American teachers. And that was very important to me because they helped me both to see my experiences, my education from the Indian guru from a different perspective. Obviously, their perspective was more Western, more Americanized. These two, 3 teachers were really important for me. And somewhere around when the century turned, I felt that I had enough understanding to start going on my own. And at that time, I started to think, what do I really know and what do I really want to accomplish, particularly for others. And the constant themes in my understanding started to emerge. And these themes were that I would like to separate culture, religion, dogmas from spiritual practices and spirituality. And I think to many people this desire, this wish would be familiar, to separate spirituality from religion. And also I started asking myself what would be spiritual practices that are culturally neutral, dogma-free, and also simple but effective. Because we're living in a fairly fast-paced world, and unfortunately that means that we don't have enough time, or we perceive that we don't have enough time. So who wants to sit on their rear end for hours and hours doing meditation if you can do it faster? And what I'm saying right now is not a gimmick. I really was asking myself this, what's really necessary. And one of my American teachers, she was particular about this, that a lot of people get obsessed with spiritual practices, and instead of using them to help themselves, they actually get mired into a certain kind of thinking pattern. Yes, it will be a different thinking pattern than most regular people, quote unquote, think. But it's still a pattern, and it's still obsessive behavior, and it's still being stuck. So this issue of what is simple but enough, that is helpful but simple, that thought was important for me. So from this thinking about spiritual practices came my understanding, which is not 100% original to me, that the spiritual path comes in 9 stages, 9 levels, 9 phases. Why 9? Well, that is a very long story for another video. Why phases rather than levels or stages? Well, because people do not progress smoothly from one stage to another. They go up and down, and the person at phase 9 can come down to phase 1, which has happened to me a couple times as well. So this is the explanation of why I call these things phases. I call them phases of love or wisdom. The interesting thing about wisdom and, well, love is a dangerous term, but let's talk about wisdom right now. What I discovered is that people at adjacent levels of wisdom can talk to each other, but if you skip a level of wisdom, there is no understanding, there's no good communication. So you might speak the same language, say Russian or English or French or Spanish, but you will not be understood. If you're at a quote-unquote higher level of wisdom, people couple of levels of wisdom below you will not be interesting to you. And if you're a couple levels below someone's level of wisdom, you will just not understand where they're coming from. They will just feel strange to you. This goes back to that fable that an eagle can come down and play with the chickens, but the chickens will not be able to soar together in the blue skies with the eagle. They just don't have that facility. So a person of the higher level of wisdom can always come down if he or she wants to, but not the other way around. These levels of love and wisdom, these phases of love and wisdom, they are characterized by greater happiness as you go up, quote unquote up, and greater level of understanding and insight, and also calmness and caring less and less about what ordinary quote unquote people think or do, and their motivation. So there is a clarity of motivation, clarity of inspiration that happens as you move up these levels of these phases of wisdom. So let's get to my books. So once I realized about these 9 phases of love and wisdom, the first book covered the first 3 phases, and the book is called Modern Series Vortices. There are 50 teachings, vortices there. A vortex is a whirlpool of energy that draws you in. So rather than telling you what to do, these teachings, these vortices, they draw you in naturally. So there's no compulsion, and no one is telling you what to do. Rather, you feel like, oh well, this is actually resonates with me, and therefore I agree with it, and therefore I'm going to practice it. So there are 3 phases in that book, Modern Series Vortices, and there's also several what I call auxiliary teachings about body and about mind and about social responsibility, things like that. So there are actually, I think there are 7 chapters, 7 sections in the book that are distinct. There's also what I call universal vortices. These are the ones which apply to all the phases. One of the reasons why I wrote that book is because me, naturally, I'm not very interested in people who are at phase 1, 2, and 3. You know, it's a necessary evil, so to speak, quote unquote, that people need to go through these phases and get an understanding of these first 3 phases. But I'm really interested in people that are at phase 4 or 5. And moving them up from there is what my life's work seems always to be. So that's part of the reason why I want to release the book. The book started as a collection of teachings, handouts actually, and thank you to my dear friend, the longest, oldest friend I have in the United States, Randy. Hello, Randy, who basically told me, hey, just release the book. And I did. So the next 2 books are really about explaining why these 9 phases of love and wisdom, what's the point of them. And it may not look from the books that they explain that, but they do. So the second book is called Abandoning Exile, and it's about the nature of thought forms, rather, these groups of thoughts that swarm around our heads and our psyche, that prevent us from experiencing deeper happiness, deeper wisdom, deeper love. And so the book is more or less fundamentally, theoretically, in a negative direction. It basically talks about why various spiritual practices and spiritual traditions do not work. And there's a little attention in that book about what would work. And the third book, which I'm writing right now, is the book that is going to talk about what works on the path to happiness, on the path of tuning to the Most High, the mystery that we will never be able to figure out by our small and limited minds. And the running title for that book is Emigration to Happiness, or Emigration to Heaven. And it will talk about what the highest happiness is and how to get to it. And that's basically my work. What do I do every day? Well, I hang out. I check on my parents who live not too far from me. And I write, and I talk to people on the phone because I am somewhat in demand for consultations. It seems like most people who call me are the people who have done quite a bit of spiritual practice, and it doesn't seem to work for them anymore, or it might have never worked for them. And I seem to be good at helping them with moving forward and not being stuck. And these people come from all kind of backgrounds and from different places in the world. So that's what it is. I write and I talk and I go for hikes. And yes, I eat occasionally. So thank you very much for watching, for tuning in, watching all the way to the end. Please do subscribe. It's very helpful to me and it spreads my work. Do like the video if you do like it. And thank you for watching again. Bye.